Actually, I've grown up with diabetes since my dad was diagnosed in the early 1960s. But at that time, you wasn't allowed to tell anybody that Daddy had diabetes. It was kept secret, and he felt like it made him lesser of a person. But I grew up knowing that he had diabetes, but not knowing that it could be hereditary and what it could mean to my family and what it has done through the years. But I think that's why I become a nurse, even though everybody else in my family does jewelry. They're in the jewelry business. My brother has a jewelry store. My sister has 3 stores. My mother retired from her jewelry store. And so I was always a little bit different. But I think that's exactly why I became an RN. And then later, after becoming an RN, I decided that we needed somebody in this area that could actually teach the diabetes information, that we were having to travel 3-6 hours, to a university to get that information. And it just made me have that desire to do something about it. But in the meantime, out of the 5 children, I'm the only one that developed diabetes. And even though my sisters and my brother are all in their 50s now, but none of them have developed diabetes except me. And I became diabetic at 17, and I've had it 39 years.
So you have type 1?
Type 1.
Okay. I'm very interested. Did your dad have type 1?
Type 1.
Okay. I'm very interested in your comment that nobody was allowed to tell that he had diabetes or share that information. Where did that come from?
I think that a lot of that was the way that he was brought up, because I think that's why my dad died from diabetes at the age of 50. His parents were like lots of people in this area that grew up that you didn't go to the doctor because that was like a sign of weakness. If you wasn't strong enough to go to work, you wasn't strong enough to do what you needed to do. And of course, a lot of people in this area just don't believe in going to doctors unless you're almost to death's door. They actually do not go to a doctor. But he was never taken to a real doctor. He saw like a little local doctor that you went in and told them what was wrong, and they gave you medication and you left. There was never lab work done. There was never an x-ray or CT scan done. That's just how they practiced then. And they gave him so much penicillin because he was always sickly as a child. But that's how they treated most everything. He took so much penicillin as a child and a young adult that he became toxic and lost his hearing. And they told him later in life that the loss of hearing was from being so toxic to the penicillin, where they gave him so much as he was growing up. But when he was really sick and not able to play and do the things that his brothers and sisters did, they didn't take him physically to the doctor. His dad would go to the doctor and say, "That boy of mine is really sick. I need some medicine for him." And they gave him penicillin. And he took so much penicillin that he lost his hearing. And he had like 40% hearing in one ear and was deaf in the other. And
was he on insulin though as a child?
No, he didn't go to the doctor himself. His dad was just going and telling the doctor what was wrong.
So he never had any treatment for the diabetes?
Never. And when he was 33, and he'd worked 2 jobs. He always worked 2 jobs. There was 5 children, plus they raised my cousin, who's 3 years older than me as well. So he had 6 children to take care of. And he worked for the highway department, which isn't a lot of money. And then he worked for Pine Rock Milk Company repairing their trucks. He was a heavy equipment mechanic. And so he worked there in the evening when he got off at the highway department. And he'd worked 2 jobs that day and was out working on someone else's vehicle in the neighborhood. And a guy that had worked 3rd shift went to sleep and ran over him in the driveway.
Oh my goodness.
And so when my mother gets to the hospital following the ambulance, they tell her that his hips broke, his collarbones broke, he has so many fractured ribs, different things like that, but that wasn't his big problem. And she said, "Well, what is his big problem?" They said, "His diabetes." She said, "Oh, you have the wrong person." She said, my husband doesn't have diabetes. They said, yes, he does. His blood sugar, when they had checked him when he was admitted to the hospital, was 1,004. And he'd worked 2 jobs that day. I was back home working again, but he just had gotten accustomed to feeling that way and could function. And at 33, they told him they estimated that he'd had diabetes since the age of 6 to 8 years old. And it had already done that much damage.
So that was why he was so sick as a child. So what we know about diabetes now is a lot different than what we knew when your dad was a child.
Much different. And much different in the way, even after he was diagnosed with diabetes, he actually had the first glucometer that came to Buchanan County. And that was because at that time his diabetes had progressed to the point they were sending him to universities here and there and trying to find help for him. But he kept working, and he still, you know, he would only go like to miss one day of work if he could go on a Friday or Monday so that he could get back to go to work. And he wouldn't miss work because of the illness at that. Although they tried to get him to because the neuropathy was so bad in his hands and feet both, but he just kept working. But when he got his glucometer, it was actually...
So you were, we were talking a little bit about your husband's disability, kind of get back to where we were. How did you get diagnosed? How did you find out you had the disease?
Actually, I was in a car accident when I was 17, and it broke my jaw. And when your jaw's broken, they put this little plastic thing in there, and your teeth are about this much apart. So I kept justifying everything that was going on after the surgery. I was thirsty more because my mouth wouldn't close all the way. And of course, I was drinking lots of things that I typically didn't drink. Like when you get really hungry, you drink this milkshake or something like that. That was loaded in carbs. But you didn't think about it because my mother had us checked every 6 months. All 6 of us had to go be checked because all that my dad was going through. So we were checked often, and we had to go regularly whether we wanted to or not. But it was just one of the things that you did. And so I was thirsty more, so I drank more. And so I justified going to the bathroom more because I was drinking more. Everything was liquid, so I still didn't pay any attention to it. And probably about 5 or 6 days after the surgery, I got what I couldn't see, like to see print on paper. And I was like, I can't read this stuff. Something's happening to my eyes. But where they go in at each side there, I thought they had done something like to the nerve to my eyes. So I go back to the doctor that did the surgery, and I was like, you did something bad. You've really messed up my vision. He's like, your vision? I'm like, yeah, I can't see anything. And so he starts checking all of the work that he's done and everything that's going on. And he says, well, it wasn't anything that we did. And I'm like, he said, maybe you should check with your regular doctor. Maybe it was from the accident itself. And, you know, it was a pretty hard lick to the head. So I was like, well, that's possible, but maybe it's just that he doesn't want to tell me that he messed up something with my eyes. So I go to the local doctor that I always saw and that also treated my dad. And so he says, well, let's start with some blood work and see if we can tell anything that's going on. I'm like, yeah, like that's going to tell about my eyes. I'm thinking I'm just going at this all backwards. So he comes in to get me in a few minutes, and he said, I have to show you something. He said, and I'm really sorry to tell you this. And I'm like, show me what? So he takes me in this little lab room, and there's a little red light blinking on this equipment. I'm like, what is that? He said, well, that measures your blood sugar. And he said, that's what it's saying. And I'm like, I can't read that. Tell me what it says. And he says, it says too high to read. I said, so how high does that go? He said, 600. And at that time, they didn't have the glucometers like we have now, but it was a bigger device that measured like they use in big labs. And so he sent me on to the hospital, and when I got there, it was 994. And they said that probably it would have happened anyway, but the stress of the surgery just brought it on maybe a little sooner. But that's how I found mine.
So what did that mean to you as a young person then, when you went home and had to live with this?
Well, I'd just been married about 7 weeks when I found out that I was diabetic. And I was really just kind of scared because I knew the things that had happened to my dad, and I knew the things that were progressively happening a little bit more and a little bit more. But he wasn't at the end stage at that point, but it was enough that I knew that the outcome probably wasn't going to be good. And I didn't think that it could be managed well because his had never been managed well. However, at that time, as a kid, I wasn't looking at it that he'd gone all those years without any care whatsoever. And I just felt like that it would probably repeat the same pattern. And I didn't have children then, and I was thinking that, you know, what kind of life would they have if I had children? And it was sort of like being told that you had cancer.
You know, it's interesting that so many people, when they get told they have diabetes, they just don't think it's anything serious. You know, even though they've seen it in their families and things. What as a nurse and working with people with diabetes, what do you see today? How are people responding?
Well, the thing is, when you see some of the people, they don't take it serious at all, and especially younger kids. That's why I like to do the Diabetes Kids Camp, because they feel like they're invincible, that nothing's going to happen to them. And actually, as diabetics, we would be much better off if it left really big red whelps on your face when it was really high, because you do something to it. If it made you turn, you know, if you got hives when it was really low, you'd fix it. But because you don't see those things, you don't realize the damage that it's doing inside. And the thing is, I think if they saw people that had died from diabetes the way my dad did, he was blind, he had lost his hearing, he had lost his vision, he had lost the function of his kidneys for 5 years, he'd lost the function of his stomach, was being fed through a Hickman catheter, and progressively one part of his body died at a time. And he wasn't an old man, he was 50 when he died. But all the years of it being left untreated had done that damage to him. And then you see children today, and since last year's camp, we've lost 3 children, 12, 19, and 21. And those children really didn't have to die from diabetes. But a lot of times I think that they think of it because it doesn't leave whelps, it doesn't leave sores on us, it doesn't do those things a lot of times. Now, you can get sores from it, but typically just because you're not managing it well, that doesn't happen until way down the line. And by then it's done the damage that a lot of times isn't reversible. But when you see that, and you see those kids following those same patterns, but a lot of that's learned behavior. Their parents have already died from diabetes. And they just don't see it as something that is manageable because it was never managed in their home.
Now, what about with type 2 diabetes? What do you see there?
Type 2, a lot of times, it is the eating patterns. It's things that they've been taught, you know. And a lot of times, children will tell you, there isn't a way to fix it. And I'm like, yeah, you can manage this. Any of this can be managed. You know, a type 1 can be managed. You just have to, you know, sometimes you have to work a little harder. But it can be managed, but they just see that as inevitable. That they are going to gain weight, they're going to progressively get bigger, they're going to eventually lose the function of their feet and legs with the swelling, with the ulcers and the things that they've seen go on, and they just accept that as part of life instead of trying to work to prevent it or to work at keeping that from happening. And that just really surprises you sometimes. And sometimes you can get through to those people, and sometimes you really can't. And that was the hardest thing for me to accept, is that you really can't help everybody. Even if you try really hard and you try to live it and you try to show them by an example, you really can't get them to understand that they can manage it.
Do you see very many children and very young adults with type 2?
Unfortunately, in this area, you do, lots. Just a few months ago, I had a child that was brought in at 4 years old, pre-diabetic, is what his diagnosis says on the paper that I get. But he's 4 years old and he weighed 109 pounds. And you're just shocked when you see that. And the mother didn't take the child to the doctor because he was so obese. She took him to the doctor because he was crying with hip pain. And she was real upset with the doctor because he sent her to see me to help manage his diet. And she was as angry and resentful at me when she left then because I told her what the doctor was saying was right. But the child was actually going to the doctor because his little legs couldn't go back and forth like they needed to. They were having to swing out and around each other because they were so big that he was having hip pain that evening because your hips aren't made to make those circles like that all day.
And were the parents?
The mother was heavy, but she wasn't as heavy for her height as the baby was for his. But he was just so obese, he couldn't breathe to walk back and forth in my office. I don't have a big office. And
have you seen them since?
No, she was as angry with me as she was the doctor. And she clearly stated when she came in that she would never go back to him, that she didn't feel like the child was that heavy. And he really was. I mean, he was a short child to be 4 years old to begin with, and then at 109 pounds, he was just so heavy, he really couldn't even play. And children aren't kind to those children. They're actually quite mean. And they say mean things to them, they don't play with them. And so a lot of times these children are left out in games, they're left out, they're not chosen to play on the ball team. And so they're not exercising. They don't want to participate in that because they know they can't keep up. And so they just progressively get heavier and heavier. And the one thing they can control is their food. So they eat it, and obviously they have somebody at 4, he's not making those decisions. The parents are making the decisions to give him that food. He's not choosing the food, they are. And, you know, when you hear about some of these different areas where they're taking children away from parents, you think, well, that's really kind of cruel. But if you live that child's life going to school every day where nobody wanted to play with you, you were never chosen to be on a team, you were never part of any group because the way you look, and that you can't keep up. And then they just set themselves up to be a failure the rest of their life. Sometimes you get where they're coming from in doing that.
So how do we, without just focusing on the problem, how do we make change? How do we, you know, sometimes I think parents want to be good parents and they want to please their children, and sometimes in the ways we're doing it, it's just not the best way. How do you think we can make some positive changes here in Buchanan County?
I think a lot of the parents really don't understand because they grew up eating these same foods. And because of the economy in this area, a lot of them rely on food banks, they rely on commodity foods, and most of the time those are the super starchy foods, the breads, the potatoes, the beans, the things that they grew up eating all their lifetime, and they really don't see that as not being beneficial to that child. That's how they grew up. But as they were growing up, lots of times they were out working in fields till dark. When they got home from school, they didn't have the luxury of sitting down with a video game or a computer. That wasn't, you just didn't do that. You didn't come inside until it was dark. Well, if you ate those foods that were very, very starchy, the beans and the potatoes and the breads, and you went outside and worked really hard, you burn up those calories. You were never given the option of having a whole soft drink by yourself at my house. Mm-hmm. There was 6 children in the family, and if you got a soft drink once or twice a month, you were dividing it with someone. So that meant much smaller portions of those soft drinks, and you got them on rare occasions. You didn't have them every day. Well, now, even with their food stamp program, they can get soft drinks. Mm-hmm. They're allowed to. They really shouldn't be allowed to, mm-hmm. but they are. And when they get those soft drinks, they have lots of them in the refrigerator. They don't have 1 or 2 in a month. They have them every day. Well, if you have 12 teaspoons of sugar in that one drink you're drinking, think about how many calories it takes to burn up 12 teaspoons of sugar. Well, they're not going to be that active. They really aren't. If they were like a gnat on steroids, they can't burn up what they're having in a day. Mm-hmm. And so they can't burn up that many calories, mm-hmm. so they're just getting heavier and heavier. Mm-hmm. And they don't have the activities. Instead of a parent telling a child, go to your room and play a game or whatever, just to get them out of sight, out of mind, why aren't they saying, let's go outside, let's go do something together? The parents need to exercise as well, because most of them are obese as well. Mm-hmm. And if we could get them to a point where they really had some community activities, some things that they could participate in that wasn't expensive, that they could afford to do with that child, and they could get out and do things with them, and have some things that they all enjoyed as a family, and help them to understand that time is a great time. If you just went outside walking or playing with your kid, that's the time that child will open up and tell you things a lot of times that you're never going to hear if they're in the room with the door closed. Mm-hmm. You don't know what's going on in their life. You don't know what they're, what's happened that day. If you're not sitting down and spending that time with them, if you're not getting out there and playing that game, and if you're not saying, it's really kind of hard for us to walk. We're going to have to do this more often. Instead of saying, that's really hard, I'm never doing that again. And a lot of times they do that. They're like, that was hard, that was really difficult. But if they started at baby steps and they understood what they could do and how they could manage, to help that child get well and healthy, and so they could participate in things at school. And sometimes that's when that child will tell you, the kids really don't choose me for the ball team at school. Mm-hmm. I'm really not I don't get to play very much. And, like one of my grandsons come home the other day, and he was all excited that he ran the mile faster than anybody in his class. And he said, I ran the mile in, something like 5.4 or something like that. And he's telling me these numbers. He said, do you know how long it took this other child? And he names his name, and I'm like, oh, that's sad, Seth. He said, yeah, everybody was mean to him and teased him about it. Mm-hmm. And, kids are mean. They do tease you about things like that. And he said it was almost time to change classes by the time he got through, Mm-hmm. And they really aren't very kind about those things. And so that child is living a much tougher life than what the parents know sometimes, unless they're really doing those things with them.
Yeah. How do we, one of my concerns is that it seems that a lot of moms and dads don't know how to cook. They don't know much about nutrition. They don't know we're all in a hurry. And so we're buying convenience foods, fast food, but processed foods. What can we do to make a difference in that?
Sometimes I don't know that there's always an answer to that, but sometimes you can make those parents understand just by pointing out some of those things, because I was truly shocked. A lot of times when I was working on the floor as a nurse, 12-hour shifts that turned into 14-hour shifts, I would stop and pick up things, for my kids sometimes at, some of the local restaurants. And as you found out, we don't have a lot to choose from. But my son in particular, he doesn't like anything that has tomatoes. If you fix spaghetti, if you fixed a meatloaf, if you fixed whatever foods, if it has any tomato base, he's not eating it. And I would stop, like at Dairy Queen, and this isn't just to be negative toward that particular chain, but he loved the chicken strip basket. Well, you think a chicken strip basket, that isn't too bad. You know, that's better than having hamburgers. It's better than having hamburger fries and that type of thing. And I was truly shocked when we started doing carb counting and look at some of the restaurants. The chicken strip basket at Dairy Queen has 1,043 calories. It has 102 carbs in that one meal. I mean, that's almost your whole daily intake.
Oh.
And then 52 grams of saturated fat. When I read that, I was like, I could almost sit and watch my son's blood vessels shut down as he was consuming that food. And once I realized that, he's never been allowed to have that, not in my presence. Not to say that now as an adult he doesn't have it sometimes, but in my presence he was never allowed that food again. But a lot of times it's just not knowing those facts. And I truly did not imagine in my wildest dreams that that one meal
And you were a
had
nurse.
that much fat. Yes,
You
I
were a
was a
nurse.
registered nurse. And I had no idea. I thought that that was healthier than choosing a cheeseburger and fries and that type thing. And you know, when you read about like a taco salad from Wendy's, actually has more calories in it than having 2 Big Macs. And you're like, it's a salad. But sometimes those salads aren't so healthy.
Yeah.
And it just, I think just not knowing a lot of times is the thing with, you know, with parenting, because those things I didn't know until I started teaching diabetes. I had diabetes myself, and until they really started in the early 80s, you know, probably about 83 before they started talking about carbs, it was just don't eat sugar. And you didn't eat sugar. But people in this area were dying really quickly because even though we never ate sugar, and I wouldn't bring it in my house, there was no lunch cakes, there was no candy bars, but we had cornbread and potatoes and beans and things. It didn't have sugar. I thought that was all allowed. It was free food. And you just don't have any idea that that large potato sometimes is like having 2 Hershey candy bars at one time, at that one setting. And you just don't realize those things. And then when you see it, and I think a lot of it is just not knowing. And it isn't that all of them are undereducated, because like we discussed, you know, being an RN, I didn't know that I was doing that to my son. I had no idea. And, you know, once you get those children in those habits of having those foods, it's really hard to say, starting today, we're never eating that again.
Yeah.
He wasn't a happy boy, but he just had to learn to live with it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you got to be kind of tough to say, we're never eating that again, really. In my presence, you won't eat that food again. Because I don't let him have that food, you know, until he's much older. Like I said, as he became a teenager, he probably drove there himself and had it, but not in my presence. And, you know, when you don't know those things, it's just really shocking when you see what some of the foods actually have in it. And we don't know those things until you really start investigating or finding out on your own, or somebody brings it to your attention. But a lot of these kids that are getting those processed foods, and a lot of times it'll be a single parent that has worked all day and they don't feel like coming home and cooking, and they just drive around McDonald's or Dairy Queen or wherever, and those kids are consuming those foods that are so high in fat that, you know, it's really causing some coronary problems down the road for them. And you don't realize that their arteries actually can be shutting down as they're putting that in their mouth. And it's scary.
So what do you think would work in this area? What would be a good way to start getting the information out to people?
I think a lot of times it's where you are. And we've discussed that in our coalition, like setting up some booths like at some of the ball games where you're really seeing parents and children together. And I did a display that had like the 20-ounce soft drink, and I laid out all the packets of sugar all around it, like in a half circle. And I was like, let's look at this, and then we had the bottle of water. And, just by changing that and not changing any other item, how much weight they can lose in a year without doing another step of exercise, not being any more active. And then the activity itself, and then we had like a display with the chart showing how much 20 minutes of exercise, what a difference it can be in blood sugars, what a difference it can mean in weight loss in a year. What it can do, just that one thing, if you did it just 3 to 4 days a week, the impact that it could have. And when you do that display and show them that, and actually we didn't put a name on the foods, but we put the type of food that would be in that chicken strip basket and show them,
Right.
Do you realize this is 1,040 calories?
Yeah.
And that your child at its age really shouldn't have that many calories in the full day. And, some of those things are just surprising to parents. And, like when you show them, and I did a display that was 2 Pop-Tarts, a glass of milk, and how many calories was in that. And then I laid out 2 Pop-Tarts and a soft drink, because a lot of kids have that before they go to school. It's what they want. The parent gives it to them. It's quick, it's easy, and the parent can be getting ready for work while they're putting that in their little bodies. But if you lay down 2 Hershey candy bars and you lay out all the packs of sugar that is in the soft drink and say, this is the same thing you gave your child this morning, they're truly amazed. They don't understand that.
So kind of a show and tell.
Right.
Kind of
One
thing.
Pop-Tart is exactly equal to a big Hershey bar. And when you put those 2 Hershey bars and all the packs of sugar from that 20-ounce soft drink, I think that's a lot of reason a lot of these children are taking Ritalin today. If they have that much sugar in their bodies, they can't sit still in that seat at school no matter what you do.
Well, and other chemicals. The other preservatives.
Yeah, and you think what's in that and what they put in their body, they can't be still.
Yeah.
They really can't.
Now, one last thing I wanted to ask you about, and that's a lot of people are saying that maybe doing some work through the churches would be a good way to go. What's your thought about that here in Buchanan County?
I think that's the same way, getting to where the parents and the children are together. Like the ball games, I think churches are a wonderful place to start. Actually, we've been doing some programs like with the ladies groups, and then Harmon Church has a Healthy Hearts group, and I've gone there a couple times and done some displays and some things, to show them. Also in the grocery stores, I've gone to our local Save-A-Lots, invited me to come and do like a healthy shopping day with, particularly at the first of the month when some of the people are getting those food stamps and things, and we do a walkthrough with the people that want to come, and we just put a big display out that tells them, on the 1st or the 3rd of the month, and we walk through, and I just do, I've got some things flagged throughout the store, where we're going to stop, like the difference in getting the regular yogurt and getting the light yogurt, how many calories they save, how much carbs they can save if they're diabetic, and how much fat is in some of these products. And then when you go by the milk, there, and you show them the whole milk, how many calories, how much fat, and then looking at the skim milk and what they can save, just by choosing that other product. A lot of times it doesn't cost more, and sometimes it may be a few cents more, but a lot of times they think if it has that big sugar-free label on it, it's wonderful for them. They can have all they want. And sometimes you have to bring that to their attention as well, which, sometimes it surprises the people in the grocery store and management when you're saying, you're not really helping yourself.
Yeah.
When you get the fat-free, no sugar added ice cream versus the regular, you're paying $1.89 more. Actually, that one item that day was $1.89 more, and it had 4 carbs more than the regular. So sometimes you're pointing out things that's not to the advantage of the store, but they still invite you back to come show them some of the other things. But they've been very kind in trying to help those people and the people that are on fixed incomes to see that you really don't have to spend that much more money to buy things that are healthier for you. And just showing them how much healthier it is to get whole grain breads instead of getting processed store name bread. That it really wasn't more expensive. And bringing that to their attention and doing that walkthrough as they're buying groceries that day and showing some of those things really does make a big impact sometimes, because you see them going back in the store, and when you're looking at some of those same people that you know personally, they really are choosing those foods then. So it does help, it does make a difference.
Let me just so that was the last question. Now I changed my mind. I do have one more. Just being here today and listening to some of the folks talk, and of course it's not everybody in the community, but I'm getting an impression that there's a lot of people with disabilities in this community, and that people don't have jobs or don't have good incomes. I wish could you just say a little bit about what you see, what's happening here in the county?
It's hard to understand exactly. A lot of times it kind of evolves through families, and a lot of times you see, and it's very unfortunate that a lot of these children are brought up to believe that that's the best way of life that they can have. When my daughter was just 6 years old, and we lived in a trailer park, and a little girl moved into the trailer park, and of course, I didn't know the people, but she came over and wanted to play. My daughter had a swing set and toys outside that the little girl didn't have, and she was playing with my daughter. Well, my daughter came in that evening, and as I was getting her ready to take a bath that night, she said, "Mommy, what is welfare?" And I said, "Where did you hear that?" And she says the little girl told her. She was telling the little girl what she wanted to be when she grew up, and who knows what it was at that time. But she was telling her what she wanted to be, and the little girl said, "I'm just going to have babies and live on welfare like my mom." And she already was saying at 7 years old that she was going to have babies and live on welfare. That happens a lot in this community. Then there's people that get on disability at very young ages. And it's really sad to see that, because they really could be productive members of society. Some of them truly could. Now, after a lot of people have worked in the coal mining industry, and all of the coal mines aren't the best of conditions in this area. You have some coal mining that the coal seam may be 20-some inches, and they're only cutting a little above that, a little below that. These men are on their knees, crawling all day long. They're never upright all day. Now, some of the larger mining and some of the more well-to-do mines, they can walk upright pretty much all day. But a lot of those men are on their hands and knees all day. Well, your back isn't made to take that type of torture all the time, or squatted position all day. And eventually their bodies just can't withstand it anymore. So you see a lot of them on disability at very young ages from the coal mining industry. You see a lot of them, from the logging industry. That's heavy, hard work, hard physical work that most bodies can't endure for long periods of time. Some people are very strong and they can do it for long periods of time. And then lots of it, I think, is heredity. When you're talking about heart conditions like my husband's family, lots of them have had severe heart conditions. Lots of them have died, very young. And my brother-in-law was only 52 when he died from a heart attack. And some of them in their 30s, some in their 20s. And a lot of that is the economic status. They're eating the foods that aren't the healthiest, but it's the cheapest way that they can get by. Lots of them have so many children in the family that they really have to buy what will last the longest and will last to the end of that month, because they really can't afford to do better. But a lot of it is genetic, but lots of it is learned behavior. And it's just sad, you know, when you see those incidents, and that they truly feel like that is their way of life, and this is what they've been dealt, and this is the best they can do. Sometimes it truly could be changed, and I think if more information was out there to a lot of these parents, you know, to show them that there is some ways that they could change things, and give them just a little bit of guidance, that it can mean a world of difference for that family.
Yeah. Well, just trying to think about, you know, how the population might be different here than in some other places, and wondering whether you yourself have ever wondered if is the relationship between the number of people that have diabetes and their kind of employment or their family life. Do you see any relationships there at all?
I think a lot of it is more toward their families as far as jobs. Now you do, and when you read about it, now they're doing some investigation about people driving this heavy equipment and that type of thing related to diabetes. You know, like dozer operators, these coal truck drivers, were that constant jolting all day long, and they really haven't determined exactly what type of impact that has, but enough so that the American Diabetes Association is taking a really close look at it. When you look at how many coal truck drivers, how many people that are operating dozers and inloaders and that type of thing in this logging industry, and then when you think about the coal mines and the track that they're running over all day and that constant jolting, I think some of those things are really going to, somewhere down the road, when they really do finish up on that research, they're going to be like, yeah, that could be part of it, you know, because that is what we do. That is the only industry we have.
Well, even if nothing else, then the stress.
Right.
You know, I mean, the mental, emotional, physical stress that puts you under.
And when you look at the coal mining industry and you look at how many deaths each year occur just from working underground in the coal mines, well, lots of men that work in the coal mine, they don't work there because they like it. They work because that's the only way they can support their family. Lots of them are really scared every day they go in there. They wonder, am I going to come out this evening or not? And then there's others that truly love it and just think, you know, I'd do that if there was something else to do. But lots of them really are scared, and you know, that would have to be really stressful to go to work every day and think, will I make it back home?
Yeah, and stressful for the family. You know, those that aren't even going in, but that continual not knowing. I think I've asked you most of the questions that I wanted to ask. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
It's just such a personal thing to me with my family and with the family history of it. And the thing that I remember most as a child is when they amputated my grandmother's second leg up to her hip, and they started with one toe, and then, you know, more toes, and then part of her foot. And, you know, it was a progressive thing that you saw growing up. And then when you saw the things that my dad went through and how, you know, how it affected each part of his body, even though he had such a strong will. I mean, growing up, I did see my grandmother eat things she shouldn't, but I cannot remember once seeing my dad ever eat anything sweet, ever. And he just didn't do it. And at 5'11", his heaviest weight in his life was 155 pounds. But he wouldn't eat anything he wasn't supposed to. And from the time that they found his diabetes, he was so meticulous with it, but yet he always felt ashamed that he had that disease. And that it was something that he did. And, you know, and at that time, nobody was saying, you know, this is genetic. It isn't something that you could have prevented. It isn't something you could help. And later, you know, in life, when they started doing some research when he was at universities, then they said, you know, this was type 1 diabetes. There's not a thing you could have done about it. There's nothing you could do. But it was much, much later in life before he was ever told that.
Okay, now I have one more thing. I'm thinking of things to ask you. As a diabetes educator, okay, so taking it from that perspective, two things that I know happen often, or that are concerns for people with diabetes that are not often talked about. One would be depression, and the second would be erectile dysfunction or impotence. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that more from a diabetes educator perspective.
Those are two things that I always talk to about my patients on the first visit, because you may not get them back, and I want to make sure that that's covered. And a lot of times, particularly in this area, because people in this area never discuss sexual dysfunction in any way, ever. They just don't. And it's very seldom that I have a man that will look me in the eye and tell me a direct answer. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you do, but they're few and far between. And the thing that I always stress to them when I ask them that, a lot of times they're even shocked, and particularly older gentlemen that come in my office. But when I look at them, I'm like, the reason I'm asking you this, if it has affected those blood vessels, they're much smaller and much farther away from your heart than these that are in this area. And if it's affected those, think of the impact it's had in your chest and in those vital organs that you need every day. So if it's affecting those, if you don't want to talk to me about it, make sure you go back and talk to your doctor about it and say, what about this? Because we don't have to talk about it here if you don't want to. But if you want to know more information about it, I'm more than happy to talk to you about that, because it's no different than if it's affecting your feet, and your feet are numb and they don't have feeling and they don't respond the way they should. There's no difference in that. And we can talk about it if you're comfortable and you want to talk to me about it, we can discuss it. But if you're not, get back to your doctor and say, this is happening too. Because a lot of times it can be treated. And a lot of times that's making a really big impact on your family and social life. If your wife thinks you're just not having sex because you don't want to, or because you don't find her attractive anymore, a lot of times it's breaking up families. It's causing people to terminate a marriage that was wonderful based on years and years of being together. But she thinks you just don't find her appealing anymore. Then she may not stay there, and she may leave, and it's because you're not talking about it. And if you say, I've got this problem and I want to get help, will you help me with this? That person will probably stay by your side and be with you forever. But if you're not open and you don't talk about it, and you just stop talking and you stop being intimate with that person, it can drive those families apart that it may never recover. And so sometimes if you say it that strongly, that loudly, they get that message. And
well, I think it's a concern that people don't bring up, neither men nor women.
It's on every assessment, and I discuss it with women as well. And women can have sexual dysfunction just like men can. You know, it can cause as much problems for them at times as it does the men. It's as to everybody that comes in. And it's about sexual dysfunction, whether it's erectile dysfunction, whether it's vaginal dryness, whether it's, and they need to be aware that that's part of the disease. It's no different than neuropathy in your feet. And you're willing to discuss that. It's no different than losing your vision and it being impaired. And you're willing to go to the doctor for that. And they just have to realize that if it's affecting those blood vessels, those around their heart can be affected much more profoundly, and they can die from that.
And then what about depression?
Depression is typically, I ask them about that on that first visit, but it's more in detail in the second visit when they come back, because the book that we teach from the Diabetes Basics class, it shows them actually with the little men, and each man representing, the little stick figure there, each man representing 100 times more likely, and it's almost doubled exactly, twice the depression. And a lot of times,
in other words,
in a person with diabetes, they're twice as likely to become depressed. And we're talking about clinical depression, not just having a a gloomy day or not feeling on top of the world each day, but for clinical depression. And it's important for the family members, and I always try to get them to bring a support person, even if it's somebody that lives alone, whoever they're closest to bring that person with them. Because a lot of times it really makes a big impact that they see that there is a reason for them acting the way they do. And a lot of times, same with looking at highs and lows in blood sugars and how irritable you can become. Just somebody slamming a door, sometimes you want to rip off their head, and you're like, well, why'd I act like that? Didn't hurt the door, didn't hurt me. Why was I so mean? Go check your blood sugar. A lot of times it's that. But in the depression, when they realize, that it's not just because we have to do a few things more in detail. We have to plan our meals a little closer. We have to check our blood sugar more often. We have to take medicine. But that's not the cause of that depression. And you have to get them to understand that it isn't just doing a few extra steps in the day that causes that it actually is a part of the disease process. And sometimes you get those people to open up and talk to the doctor about it. But even at best, you're getting a few to do it, but lots of them need to, but they just don't.
And how can people treat the depression? How can it be treated effectively?
Sometimes people actually have to have medication. And sometimes you can help them to understand that it isn't always about medicine. If they do some of that physical exercise, the endorphins and things, when you get them to understand the impact that just that little bit of exercise has, it's amazing. Just like this morning, some of the people that you interviewed, when I got that one couple to understand, he had almost shut down. He wasn't even talking to her anymore. But once that they started losing weight and they started exercising together, she's telling me what a wonderful life they have now. And I'm like, yeah, just, 15 minutes, 3 days a week. It's not asking to give up your job. It's not asking you to give up your family time. 15 minutes isn't a lot. Mm-hmm. And they've actually done research to prove that the college kids that they were doing tests on that did 30 minutes of continuous exercise, or the ones that did 15 in the morning, 15 in the evening, they had exactly the same amount of weight loss, exactly the same amount of muscle mass gain. It's almost identical. So it's not like you have to give up your day or your family time just to get that little bit of time in. A lot of times you're just talking about 15 minutes. That's not asking a lot. And the emotional well-being is phenomenal. That comes along with it. And a lot of times just seeing that they're healthier, that their blood sugars are better, they're feeling better, they're losing some weight, and they're doing so much better physically, that emotional health just comes in stride with it. But a lot of times you just can't get that across to them, just straight out. You have to get somebody like the couple this morning to really stand up and say, look at us. This is where we were. This is where we are now. And sometimes if you have them to stand up and actually show those pictures and the impact that it's had in their emotional health as well as their physical health, it's just phenomenal when you see that.
Yeah. And I guess that's the reward of being a diabetes educator, when you get those success stories.
And it was really hard when I first started to realize that I couldn't help everybody. That I felt devastated. I mean, to see some of the people, that just couldn't grasp it and didn't want to make those changes. So that was hard for me. But then when you see those, you're like, yeah, I can make it through. I can do this.